Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call the Finance and Audit Committee meeting to order and welcome all of you to our March 16th meeting. I'd like to recognize we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Nanaimo First Nation. Our clerk this morning is Ms. Sky Snellgrove. Today's Finance and Audit Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left for agenda items only. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding the agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. Members have been granted the authority to join meetings electronically, and please refer to the guideline sheet for reference. And today we have Councillors Martman, Turley, and Brown all joining us electronically, in addition to those who are present with us today physically. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Snellgrove.
Thank you. For agenda item 7I, BC Sustainable Energy Association Coolant program for Nanaimo schools, we're replacing Laura Mercer, Director of Finance, as the introducer with Dale Lindsay. And we're also removing agenda item 7L, Strengthening Community Services Fund, second intake.
Thank you very much. A motion for adoption of the agenda is amended. Moved Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Opposed? None. Motion carries. We have no presentations. We do have a delegation, though, this morning. Bruni and Peter Brown. If you'd care to come up to the podium, please.
I have some handouts here for you.
If you could give those to the clerk, please. And when you get to the mic, if you can introduce yourselves, give us your addresses, and you'll have 5 minutes, and I'll let you know at the end of 4 minutes that you've got a minute left. I think that's actually already been circulated, a non-color version.
Good morning, Mayor Krogh and honorable councillors. On behalf of my colleague, Peter Brown, and I, Bruni, we wish to present you with a gift of 7 organically grown fig tree starters. It is our hope that you will allow us to plant them on the sunny northern slope of the city lawn. It's on the flyer there. Towards a sign of your goodwill towards Nanaimo becoming a fig tree city. Frank Ney, past mayor, planted the first fig tree right on that little park before you get into the city. Vancouver Council has started planting fruit trees, as lawns are a wasted commodity in high real estate prices, and the figs would present a colorful buffer to their adjacent apartments. With future water shortages, climate change, and world eruptions, figs are an excellent local food supply, as they are delicious, both fresh and dried. There are many places figs can be grown throughout the city. And when the city is ready to move forward into expanding figs, Peter Brown here is the Nanaimo fig man, and he can supply you with all the figs you need. Figs are mentioned throughout the Bible as being the tree of knowledge. So by making Nanaimo a fig tree city, we'll all get smarter, yes? There is nothing you have to do. We will plant them. All you have to do is give them a little water sometime. So let's get started. Do I hear a yes?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Do you have anything to add to the presentation? Please. There's 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Bruni. Is there any questions about fig trees that I might answer, being the fig expert in town?
Councillor Kesselbrock.
Thank you to the delegation. Yeah, I'm curious what varieties of figs you'd be providing to the city.
Well, I've got about 12 different varieties, and none of them produce viable seed. So they're not they don't go out of control like blackberries. They don't grow from seed. So, and they don't have roots like bamboo that, are a problem. They're very easy to control. Once they're established, they don't require any water. They find their own water usually.
Great, and just maybe a sample of the varieties that you'd be providing? Just curious on some names.
Well, kind of the standard Dessert King, Colombo, Italian honey fig, mission fig, many, Turkish fig. They're all different. They produce, from mid-July till October, the different varieties.
Wonderful. So we could have quite the genetic mix if we so choose.
Well, all the figs in Nanaimo are clones because they're not grown from seed. They were brought here from, Europe and other places, mostly Southern Europe. So some of mine are from, if people remember Tony the Tailor, that's where I got my first figs. The old Croatian fellow.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Turley and then Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation to the delegation. I'm curious, I have a background in horticulture and I'm frantically scratching my head trying to remember what climatic zone figs, at least the majority of the figs we're growing. Is it around zone 7 or do you know? Because that would determine where they would be best survived and where they're located.
This is one of the only places in Canada where, this little strip along the coast, Vancouver and, Vancouver Island and along the coast by Vancouver, they won't grow in Abbotsford, for instance.
Yeah, so they're probably zone 8 then, because Abbotsford is in a zone 7. So thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks for the presentation. I think it's a great idea. I have figs in my own backyard, and I've got a whole bunch of ones that are about this tall in pots, getting ready to start this year. We're looking at the idea in our coming up city plan to incorporate food into sustainable food production, possibly into our parks, that sort of thing. Problem I see with figs is having seen them around, and I was on a farm where they are, they're great as long as they don't get too tall, so they do require some maintenance. The problem that I found with one of them was that when the figs get to a certain ripeness, the starlings start ripping them apart and can do, and just create an entire mess over the entire area, which is why I'm not so keen on having them in parks unless we had a fund available to maintain them and harvest them, glean them, that sort of thing. So very much appreciate it. I know lots of people grow figs around here, and I think we have one out in front of City Hall too. We do, so thank you for that.
Yeah, the mess that trees create, figs on the ground and stuff, that's the kind of dirt mess that we should embrace, and the other kind, the pesticide used on the front lawn, the broadleaf herbicide that used on the City Hall lawn, that's the one that we should reject. And the birds need something to eat. If we want birds, they have to have something to eat. And if we plant all ornamentals, like I understand that the city was donated 300 ornamental cherry trees. Well, they don't produce any pollen for the bees. They don't produce any fruit. And so all of the birds have to come to my yard to eat, or the few people that have a garden. If we didn't have blackberries, they wouldn't have anything else, the invasive plant, that everybody hates. The birds wouldn't have anything to eat because everything else is asphalt and lawn. So we should be more worried about what comes out of the exhaust pipe than some figs on the ground that might be a bit messy. They're organic. They're not plastic, There
won't be any figs left on the ground. I'll harvest them all. They're just delicious, dried, delicious. And if we had no food, if all the ferries stopped or whatever, you know what? We could practically live on figs for quite a long time.
It is true that even after the heavy frost, the small ones will stay on the tree, and They don't taste very good, but if you had nothing else to eat, in South America, they cook them up with sugar, even the little hard ones. So, you know,
Councillor
they're
Gesselbrock,
pretty good.
something else you wanted to
I
say?
had a question to staff.
Okay. Is that it for questions to the delegation? Thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation this morning.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Just a question to staff. What is the process for looking at approval of planting trees in the city precinct here on the grounds?
We don't have necessarily a policy of where you can or can't plant fruit trees. However, what we do like to encourage is that fruit trees are planted within one of our designated community gardens or something like the food forest that we have at Beaufort Park, which is a great place for this type of thing. So typically we want to see them in a place where there's a group that's going to maintain them and take care of them. We wouldn't necessarily recommend them in front of City Hall unless there was a group designated to want to glean them and make sure they're taken care of. So we're definitely are planting trees like this, but we're in our community gardens or something like our pilot project, which is the community forest or the edible forest at Beaufort Park.
Great, thank you. I just a comment here. I think that we're near the cusp of ripping the Band-Aid off and not being so prudish about fruit trees. And I think that a few fig trees in City Yard Hall, maybe some persimmons, some plums, some apples, could greatly enhance, I think, quality of work life for city staff on a break, be able to go outside from June, probably right through to October, pick a fresh apple off of a tree, a fig, a plum, an apricot. Pretty nice perk, I think, to have. And so I think that it's something that we need to look at a bit more seriously and pursue. So thank you.
I must comment, Councillor Gesselbrock, as the guy who comes to the office 5 days a week and passes the fig tree planted right beside the back entrance to City Hall where no one ever picks the figs and they just rot on the ground. Your concept of an ideal Garden of Eden, I would be more impressed if somebody just picked the damn figs that are already there, and that'll be a good start on the process. But thank you. Reports, captioning options for council meetings. Ms. Gurry, or pardon me, Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I just needed to comment. I have picked the figs at City Hall before. So I think it's something that we shouldn't just necessarily shut down, because I think it's like if we build it, they will come. So I like Councillor Gesselbrock's idea. And sometime in the future, I really would like to explore this more. Thank you.
Well, if it gives you any comfort, on Saturday, I'll be attending the planting of three apple trees in Beaufort Park in honor of a late friend and great mentor to my son-in-law, Brian Fisher. So you'll have the opportunity if you wish, and then you can go and pick the figs later in the year. Thank you. Caption optioning for council meetings. Ms. Gurry, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Worship. So the purpose of this report is to present options for the Finance and Audit Committee's consideration regarding captioning for the Shaw Auditorium at the Vancouver Island Conference Centre and broadcasts on Shaw TV. So back in March of 2021, so a year ago now, Council endorsed a recommendation from the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness to direct staff to implement a live captioning service for all future advisory committees on accessibility and inclusiveness meetings, with the potential to expand to all of Council and committee meetings. So if you look at page 2 of your report, which is page 16 of your agenda, there's a summary of captioning services that we already do provide and where there isn't captioning available at the moment. So through Zoom, we have captioning available, as well as through eScribe, we have captioning available already. So staff have investigated the options for captions to appear on meeting recordings on Shaw TV and in council's chambers during meetings. And there are limited companies that offer the service. And we also have to be cognizant of the CRTC requirements, and that captioning is not 100% accurate. We had a demo of one, and we tried, for example, to get Nanaimo First Nation to appear, and it just would not work no matter what. Some options learn as you go, and some will just never learn proper wording or spelling of certain words. So to implement in some of the options we looked at, the approximate one-time cost of installation in the Shaw Auditorium would be $24,700, and the ongoing usage charges would be between $200 to $250 per year. The other thing to consider is that Rogers recently purchased Shaw TV. So in this acquisition, if we were to go with the Shaw captioning, there's no guarantee that it would stay with the new Rogers component once it took over. So if council were to pursue using captions provided by Rogers, it is unknown at this point if the captions would be broadcast within the Shaw Auditorium for those watching the meeting in person. And captions may only be available for those watching meetings on TV at home. So depending on the council's direction, staff can explore this option further with Rogers once formal announcements are made, but there are some options to either proceed with the costs that we know now or wait to pursue further options. So that is what is before you this morning.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gurry. Councillor Gesselbrock, or you just left you over from before? Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question to staff. If we didn't go with this option, but I'm quite in favor of it, but if someone was watching Shaw TV, could they not just load up a Zoom, and at which point they'd be able to see the captions there?
So thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Bonner. Right now, we don't allow citizens watching from home to attend our meetings via Zoom unless they have signed up to be a delegation. And that is for basically for security and streamlining meeting purposes to make sure they don't like share screen or blast us with other information that we don't necessarily need or want during a meeting, as well as keeping the screen focused for those that are actually in attendance at the meeting. So right now, we don't allow citizens just observing the meeting to attend via Zoom.
Well, I mean, if they were at home, they couldn't watch it via streaming on Zoom?
They could watch it live streamed on our website, but not through Zoom.
Okay, and there are captions on the website or not?
Yes, so when they live stream watch it, they are seeing captioning. So if anyone has a computer and is sitting at home watching it through their computer, they will have captioning, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
Councillor Turley, and then Councillor Martin, and then Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair, Worship. Through you to staff, I'm just curious, not knowing anything about this, but sometimes when you purchase a program or develop a program for use in your home or business, there are updates happening, and sometimes these updates cost money and sometimes they come free. Do we have any idea if there would be significant charges for updates down the road, or is it, have we gone that far to investigate?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Turley. So yes, normally there would be upgrades, updates that would be provided for either in the usage charges that we pay annually, or sometimes there might be an upgrade fee. And if it was substantial, we would bring it back to the committee for approval. However, the one-time cost right now that we are aware of is $24,700.
Thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I would like to move option 2 if I get a seconder.
So seconded, Councillor Thorpe, please.
And if I can just speak to it, I think this is very important for inclusivity and accessibility, but with the changes coming with Shaw and Rogers, I wouldn't want to go through anything and then find out that it's not compatible or for whatever technical reasons. But I would like to keep this on the front burner, and I would like to see what we can do when Rogers comes in. So I think the recommendation of option number 2 meets that need. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with Councillor Martman, and I was going to make the same motion, actually. I'm all in favor of captioning, but if I'm reading the report in front of us correctly, if we wait within a year, we're expecting some type of report regarding possibly having Rogers provide that service at no charge to the municipality, rather than us spend $25,000 now for something which might not be compatible. So I'm prepared to wait a short period of time and see if we can get this through Rogers. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with Councillor Thorpe. This is by far the most reasonable recommendation. I'm curious, though, do we have any stats on how many watchers we have or viewers we have on Shaw? No way to capture that.
Through the chair.
Or Ms. Gurry.
Through the chair, no. Shaw TV doesn't record stats for viewership.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No further discussion. There's a motion. It's been seconded. All those in favor? Any contrary? Councillor Brown is contrary. Yes. Motion carries. Thank you very much. On to travel assistance grant, Nanaimo Minor Hockey, U13. Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Worship. I'm very pleased to actually bring this forward to council, because after 2 long years, it's actually 2 years this month that these kind of activities were stopped, and now we're starting up. So this is a travel assistant grant to the minor hockey U13 for an amount of $550, I believe. And I can answer any questions council may have on the grant or the purpose of the travel grant.
Councillor Hemmons is moving. Councillor Thorpe, are you seconding and you wish to speak to it?
Unless Councillor Hemmons does. I had a question for Mr. Harding. Thanks. Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Harding, and I should know this, but it has been a while. Am I correct in recalling that these grants are basically first come, first served if they meet the criteria?
That's correct.
Thanks.
Council has up to $7,500 once that's expanded. We let council know that it's all gone. If other groups come, we can deal with that at that time, but typically we don't expend all $7,500. Right. Definitely not the last 2 years. So.
Yeah, thank you.
No further questions. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. On to public engagement summary and phased concept plan for Westwood Lake Park amenity improvements. Mr. Harding again, please.
Thank you, Worship. Unfortunately, the parks planner, Ms. McDonald, is not able to attend. Oh, there she is. That's great. I stand corrected. I was hoping I could put my old planner hat on and do the presentation, which Mr. Lindsay always loves and learns something when I become the planner. But I will turn it over to Ms. Lindsay.
The McDonald's are already.
He won't get to learn anything today. He'll get a much better presentation. But we're very pleased to bring forward as council is well aware, we did quite an extensive engagement process in the summertime of long-awaited needs for upgrades to Westwood Lake. And so we're presenting to you the findings of that engagement and the desire to get through phase 1 this year, which council has allocated funds for. One of the things I would say is we're doing phase 1, which is the backside of this enhancement, but the real, and which is really important, but the front end, which we'll hope to do next year or the following years, is really what would create that great park experience, which is expanding the beach, creating a trail around, new accessible washrooms, and other amenities. But we will go through this, and I'll turn it to Mr. McDonald to do the presentation. But also Mr. Mike Elliott, who's the project manager, has also got us to this point, is here to answer any questions. I'll turn it over to Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Please.
Good morning. Don't want to take away from the report. The report has all the details this morning, but just want to walk you through some of the
improvements that we're excited to be embarking on, and also offer some details and answer any questions you might have on the process today. So first of all, as you know, Westwood Lake Park has 3 main entrances, and our focus area is really the main parking area at the end of Westwood Road, as well as the first beach area. So those are both really the gateways that most people access this park from. There are other access points in the future that we might want to focus on in future years as well for improvements, but this is really focused on Westwood Road. And just to remind everyone, Westwood Lake Park was built in the 50s through help from the Legion, and it is a person-made lake. It was a marsh prior to that, part of our traditional electrical system actually along the Millstone River, and obviously has become a fixture in the community for recreation since then. In the spring of last year, in May, as well as in the summer, you looked at a couple of options for public engagement, and we're happy to report back that over the last year or so, we have done significant public engagement through the Reimagine Nanaimo Phase 1 and 2 processes. We've spoken to about 30 stakeholder groups. We've had online surveys through the Get Involved platform that have had over 600 respondents. And an interesting thing I think to note in that is that most of those 600 respondents actually filled out the survey in the first weekend that we launched the survey. Over 90% of them did. And the average age of the respondents was between 35 and 50 years old, which tells us a lot about the passion, I guess, around certain demographics for this park. The pictures that are on the left of the screen are the 2 site plans that we tested back in the fall, and that we've made some significant changes to them based on the feedback, which we'll talk about more. And just to let you know, this was not just a survey that reached park users, but it also was widely advertised through the whole community, but also the immediate neighbors of the park. And Mike and I also had Mike Elliott and I had a meeting on site with about 30 of the neighbors who would be directly impacted by some of the potential construction work, and got their feedback onto the design. So what we've got before you right now is really a site plan that blends all the public engagement responses that we've heard with our desires to reduce conflict at this end of Westwood Road, initial gateway into Westwood Lake Park. And it takes advantage of a portion of new land that was purchased in around 2005 by the city. It was the old caretaker's residence, to help expand this parking lot and reduce conflicts that we are noticing between pedestrians, cyclists, and the general public that are coming in by car, as well as to take advantage of this caretaker's residence, which used to have pasture land and other disturbed area on it, so that we can expand the beach. And you'll see that there's a dotted line around the foreshore area, and that's where we hope to do some future work next year in Phase 2 of this project, with an initial focus being on this parking lot as Phase 1. So just to go into a few details of this current arrangement, it adds 36 standard parking stalls to the area. It also is located, as I mentioned, on a disturbed part of the site. We have reduced, and we'll get into this more, but we've reduced the number of trees that will be impacted through this new layout. And the focus is really on pedestrian safety and allowing families and all users to have safe routes through the site down to the beach and the destination areas. In addition, through the accessibility, the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness, we received feedback in the fall about new technology for accessible vans. And because of that, we've actually created some unique design for 4 new additional accessible stalls at the site, which is a total of 8 stalls that would allow for somebody who has either a side loading or a rear loading van to safely fit into a site and get to the beach or get to the trail area. As far as I know, this is the only location in Nanaimo that through a city facility we would have this new design standard for vans. Also part of the design is having permeable surfacing, and there are some geotechnical assessments ongoing that are helping us to determine whether or not, which of these treatments, I guess, is probably the most effective. But we hope to have a combination of infiltration areas. So there'll be rain gardens, and a lot of what you can see in the landscaped areas on this plan feature what we call rain gardens, where water is brought to those landscaped areas and it's allowed to penetrate and filter back through the soil system, as well as a permeable travel lane. And again, the surface is still to be determined, but we're looking at a couple of options for permeable pavement. And then a parking area, which is also permeable to allow infiltration. Also, I mentioned that this is mostly on a disturbed area, and the current design only will impact one significant tree. And I'm having trouble with my own eyes seeing where that tree is on the slide, but it is superimposed. It's in the middle of the parking lot where there's one significant tree that would be impacted. Previous designs that we did showcase in the fall had up to 6 or 8 significant trees impacted, so this new layout has helped to minimize that. And there are 36 total trees that are not of a significant size that would be impacted. Mike Elliott and our design consultants are working through right now how that tree permit process would follow out. And at the moment, they're looking at a ratio of replanting of about 4 to 1, but Mike can answer some more questions about that in the future. We're also looking at having a buffer between the residents that you can just see at the top of the slide. It's Layton Place. There's some residential houses there, just to maintain that there's limited impact on the adjacent residents because we are moving closer to their houses. And we have had quite a bit of engagement from the neighbors across the road on Westwood Road and Marlene Place. If we proceed this year with phase 1, which we're excited to do, then we also will be continuing doing some detailed design and cost estimating for phase 2. And phase 2 will be focused more on the foreshore and the beach area, looking at including some universal access to the beach through this project, having more recreational amenities, and having really making it a gathering space for the community with picnic areas and additional seating, as well as additional areas to swim. We're also looking at, through this process, connecting to our transit and bike networks. And even through phase 1, there is a hope to have a bike lane along Westwood Road, as well as a connected sidewalk. And then in the future, we have built into the design bus turnaround so that if regional transit, whether it's on demand or in another way, comes up to the site, there is the ability for a bus to turn around on site so that we're not just focusing on car access to this location. And we also will be working with some of our user groups, like the Mountain Bike Association, to help reduce ongoing conflicts and just the popularity of this location. And other amenities that we would really like to include some covered spaces and a universal amenity building here, which is washrooms plus other necessary items for the lifeguard station, maybe outdoor showers, other community amenities at that location, but upgrading of the existing washrooms as well as probably creating a new washroom building which would be universally accessible. Under consideration as well for the future is a new playground and doing some additional planning work for the park, including really looking at biophysical characteristics and just the volume of use that we're getting, and how some of the sensitivities in the site maybe are being balanced with the increased use that we're seeing. So you have this slide in front of you in your report, but next steps, the project management team will be looking at filing permits and getting things in motion so that phase 1 can begin in the summer or fall of this year. And that is that parking area at the end of Westwood Road, really focusing on that. Concurrently with that, we'll be doing reach out to the different committees, so the Environment Committee, the Accessibility Committee on Inclusiveness, and also the neighborhood, and just giving them regular updates and having them evaluate some of the design details for phase 2. And we're working hard to have phase 2 in the budget for 2023 and beyond. And that will come up through consideration through the spring and summer budget process. And just to close off, Richard, Mike, and I are happy to answer any questions, but we're hoping that you are excited to see phase 1 potentially starting in this summer and fall of this year.
Ms. McDonald, thank you very much to you and everyone involved in this. I'd use 4 words: exciting, practical, accessible, and beautiful. Councillor Thorpe.
Oh, I'm glad we're letting Ms. McDonald sit down. Thank you, Mr. Harding. Thank you, through you, Your Worship, to Ms. McDonald. I really appreciated this report, and I am personally very excited about the concepts that you're presenting here. This is such a popular recreational area for citizens of Nanaimo, and I think it's overdue for some upgrades and improvements. I was very impressed with the public engagement that you did and the responses that you've provided us with. And as I scanned through them rather quickly, it seemed to me that common themes were improving the beachfront, the parking situation, and probably washrooms showed up quite a bit. So I'm impressed with how you've managed to, I think, improve the parking without damaging the beachfront area, or at least doing it in such a way that it has minimal impact on the park environment and the natural environment. So that's well done, I think. In terms of time frames, you indicated phase 1 would hopefully start this fall. I'm curious about future phases, and I guess the only thing that surprised me, and Your Worship, this would be my question, I suppose, the washroom upgrades. I was a little surprised to see that further along in the phasing rather than sooner. And maybe there's good reason for that, but I'm curious if you could reply to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Worship. Remember last year we were trying to provide council some things, some projects we could get done relatively quickly. Phase 1 is where we've proposed are things that we can do relatively quickly and do in this year. To do a washroom building plus the repair and setback requirements for phase 2 takes us a bit longer, particularly the design of a washroom building. And washroom building always does cost a lot more than the public and the council and everybody else thinks it's going to be. So, and plus we want to make sure with this building that we do build, it's going to really serve the park for years to come. So it'll be a bit bigger, and of course we also want it to be inclusive in many ways. So it's a different budget item, and we need some time to do that and time to present it to council and to the public how that will look. So it's a little more difficult fit with the phase 1 being by the water side, and it's also much more bigger. It's a bigger impact to the users, so it just takes a bit longer to work those details out.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and I'm sure there's a lot of complications that have to be overcome, but I think that's good news that the public will welcome that this is coming, and I think there's something here for everybody, really. Noting in the public consultation feedback that everybody has different opinions and you can't please everybody, but I think this is a great concept overall. And again, going back to the phases, if things go well and council approves and so on, and taking into account supply chain issues and everything that's happening in the world today, would you see this entire project being completed within possibly 2-3 years? Is that reasonable?
Thank you, Worship, to Councillor Thorpe. So this fall, when the council starts reviewing the budgets, we'll have some of those options prepared for them to consider in the budget. And based on funding availability, the council then can determine, do you want to get it into 2023 or 2024, or how we want to do that. We'd like to do as much at once as we can to minimize the impact to the park. So we may come with a phase 2 being more all at once than spread out, but we'll work on those details and how we can do those phases and present that in the fall to council.
Great, and I recognize that future councils will have their say as this proceeds, but I'm really glad to see it getting underway. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In order, Councillors Bonner, Hemmens, Gesselbrock, and Turley.
Thank you, Worship. I'm very much happy with this coming forward, and I'm looking forward to all of it when it's completed. I didn't notice any barbecue facilities for the public in any of the pictures or the layout. Is that something that we're looking at as well?
So, Your Worship, to Councillor Bonner, so barbecuing is one we've slowly been not emphasizing, particularly in our natural parks with particularly the fire dangers that we've had over the years. What we will provide, though, are places that you could have bring your gas barbecue or such on a picnic table that will be metal or such to reduce the fire hazards. Because many times during the summer we have to totally eliminate any kind of open flame, particularly in the Westwood Lake area and some of our natural parks. Okay. So it's one of those issues with fire that we have to be careful with. And so we haven't encouraged the old kind of barbecues for many years.
Good, thank you.
Councillor Hemmens.
Thanks, Your Worship. Very supportive of this project. I think it's going to be a real win. I'm curious, at any point, are we going to have to close off access to the park to get the first part built?
Thank you, Worship, to Councillor Hemmens. We hope not. Mr. Elliott, again, thank you, Mr. Elliott, for getting us a spot too. Ms. McDonald and Mr. Elliott worked really hard to get us to this location or this position, and so he'll be working on that, how to do it. I think there will be some disruptive days. Again, that's why we were initially thinking in the fall rather than in the middle of summer. We do think there's some opportunities to do some quick interim possible options before summer to allow maybe some overflow parking into the area. We'll see that. But yeah, most likely be a few days where we may have to close off. But we think by doing phase 2, we can keep the front entrance open, but we'll see how that all goes through it.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thanks. Yeah, this heavily used park, and this is much needed. Just sort of a side question. Some of the tree that needs to come out is quite accessible. And I'm just curious, in cases where there's like a large tree that we remove that's really accessible, do we just firewood it, or does it, like, given the price of lumber, there might be opportunity to get it to a mill pretty easily without much cost, and probably the return would be more on the lumber?
Yeah, Your Worship, to Councillor Gesselbrock, depending on the tree, we will we'll look at if we can actually make something out of it, and we'll actually get the contractors to take it down in such a length that we can then get it to a mill it up, and bring it back, and we'll make something out of the wood. Other times, if it's just firewood, we typically try to leave it on the side for groups, organizations that they can come and take the wood for their use. So it'll be a mixture of that. But with that tree, we'll have to look at it and see if we can mill it up. Then we will.
Great. Yeah, definitely. If it is cost reasonable, the highest best use is great. Thanks.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. Harding, I assume. So I'm curious about the differences between the existing single-track trail and the existing accessible trail. Is it more than just trail width and trail surface, or are those the two criteria?
Actually, that's Mix McDonald to answer, but just to clarify. So we have a few different types of trails there. We do have the wider trail that's for walkers, runners, strollers, and such. But over the years, we've worked with the Mountain Bike Club to create a separate trail, which is a single track trail for mountain bikes. So there's two different specific trails. Is that what you're mentioning?
Yeah, I just, there was, hang on a sec, I didn't highlight it. I thought I saw somewhere in here under the final concept plan mention of trails, multi-use trail. But then on the map, there's existing single track trail and existing accessible trail. So I'm trail confused, I guess.
Yes. So I guess there's probably three things. One is on phase 2, we hope to have connect the overall Westwood Lake Trail system to, rather than walking through the parking lot, there's actually an accessible trail for everyone to utilize. But we do also have the single track mountain bike trail that's a little bit off from the main trail. And that's going to continue on to stay there. So there are a few different trails.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. One more question, if I may. I'm wondering if, because this is quite a busy park and always has been, is it the option, if we're going to go to the trouble of making this parking lot, that we could have the ability to signify with when the parking lot is full, so that people come up aren't just milling or driving around constantly trying to find a parking spot? And even having that sign farther down the road, just to give people an option that let them know that the park is full.
Your Worship, Councillor Bonner, those are options we could look at. One of the benefits, there are some on-road parking that people can utilize down Westwood Road. So as some of the subdivisions come in, there's some on-road, which we'll utilize that also. We don't have a caretaker up there, but during lifeguarded hours, that is something we could have lifeguards added to if it works.
Yeah, the idea is if people know farther down Westwood Road that it's full, then they can park down there and don't have to drive all the way up there, drive around for 15 minutes and go back again. Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Thorpe.
If there's no other questions, Your Worship, I'd be very pleased to move the staff recommendation.
Please. Seconded, Councillor Himmons. Any discussion? I'm not seeing any. The McDonald's have won the day. Not like Glencoe. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. That's an exciting prospect for the city. Bevan Park Outdoor Learning Center detailed design. Mr. Harding.
Yes, thank you, Worship. This is an information report. Again, one of the things we learned through this last 2 years with COVID is the desire and need for more outdoor learning in classrooms. So this is also an area of we've been wanting to improve this particular playground area at Westwood Lake, got Westwood Lake on the brain, at Bevan Park, an outdoor learning area. So it's just giving the council information of us moving some funds in to do design for this area. It's right, if you know the social center, it's the northern end, the end that faces the playground, the Altrusa playground. We have a lot of youth programming there, and desire is to create a better outdoor atmosphere for the youth. And so we'll do the design this year, and again come back for consideration for council for doing the actual improvements in future years.
Any Councillor Martman.
Thank you. And through you to Mr. Harding, I'm just wondering, did we have any feedback from Akai on this, or will we be taking it to Akai in case they can point us out anything we don't see?
Thank you, Worship, to Councillor Martman. Absolutely. So once we get into the design phase, and we've been really enjoying using or including ASA in these design processes, and we'll bring that to them once we get further into the design aspect and bring some ideas to them.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if Ms. Wark wanted to say something.
Thank you, through your worship, to Councillor Martman. We actually did bring the concept design to the ACAI meeting, and we did receive some feedback there. And we'll be incorporating their feedback into the detailed design phase.
Here's that one.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions. Much appreciate that presentation. The next is the Heritage Facade Grant, 41 Chapel Street. Good morning, Mr. Schulberg. How are you?
Your Worship, maybe I'll just introduce the item, and if there's any questions, Mr. Schulberg is available to help answer any questions. But we're here simply this morning to seek the committee's support for a $10,000 grant for work recently completed at 41 Chapel Street. And I would note, Your Worship, it's typically under the program we come forward to you before the work is completed. In this case, I think there were certainly discussions prior to the work with staff, but I think there was a misunderstanding of how the program operated. Despite that, staff still think that the project is worth consideration and are recommending $10,000 from your annual facade grant program. And as mentioned, Mr. Schulberg's here, happy to take any specific questions on the project.
Thank you very much. I am not seeing any questions. Councillor Hemmons is moving the motion. Seconded Councillor Bonner. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. The only question, it's not really a question, it's just a statement, and I think probably this points to a positive process of how to deal with these grants, because given the supply chain issues and labor shortages, et cetera, which isn't likely to end soon, finding out what the actual price of the project is, including overruns, would help to determine a more accurate picture of the picture that is needed, as opposed to, in today's world, kind of best educated guess, in the hopes that it'll come too close to that. So it may not have been purposely done, but I think it was probably the right decision. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. I'm not seeing any other questions, comments. Motion's been made. All those in favor? Any contrary? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is the 2021 budget carry forwards. Ms. Mercer. Money to spend, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So at the end of each year, a review is done of all operating and capital projects, and this review identifies which projects are almost complete, work in progress, or have been delayed and will be need to continue into the following year. So there are many reasons why a project is carried forward, and some of them are within the control of the city. So for example, if we delay a project in favor of a more critically important project, that's within our control. But some of them are not in our control, such as weather, pandemics, supply chain issues, and that type of thing. So all of these contribute to a project needing to be carried forward. So over 2021, we have identified $57.9 million in carry forwards, and these projects will be added to the final 2022 to 2026 financial plan that we will bring to you next month at the Finance and Audit Committee. So 80% of this total represent work in progress projects, and that's just a little over $45.6 million. So the report highlights some of the larger carry forward projects, which the bulk of those projects are work in progress. There are a smattering of the other two statuses as well, but the bulk of them are work in progress. So these 18 projects account for more than half, so about 58% of the total carry forward balance. So the bulk of it lies within a few number of projects. So 16% of the projects were delayed or not started, and that was just a little under $9.2 million. So some examples of those type of projects were, so the Stadium District bleacher seating, and that had a carry forward of about $650,000. And this is a multi-phase project with completion expected in 2022. So depending on what phase that the bleachers sat in, it carried forward into 2022. We also carry forward the building permit software for about $375,000. So a request for information has been completed and work is currently underway, and I think they might have released it already, but the RFP for selection of a software vendor. So that will be completed, but that project took a little longer and it was delayed into 2022. And finally, 4% of the projects were substantially completed. So that was just a little under $2.5 million. And some examples of those projects are the emergency water supply pump station. So it had about a $275,000 carry forward, and that was just to cover outstanding commitments. So we didn't receive all of the invoices at December 31st, and we knew those were coming in later, or after we closed our year end in 2022, so we had to carry forward that amount to cover those costs. And a similar story with the Millstone Trunk South project. We had about a $516,000 carry forward there, and this again was to cover outstanding commitments that we hadn't received invoices for at December 31st, but also to cover some maintenance work that happened that will happen in 2022. So this is the project where the sewer utility goes through Bowen Park, with the lovely new trail on the top. So this represented the utility part of that project. So this carry forward total is approximately 46% of the total 2021 budget, and that budget had a total of $123.2 million. So this percentage is just above the average carry forward percentage of the last 5 years. So the report and the attachments provide the committee with a summary of all the projects that are being carried forward to 2022, and they're broken down by department and by type. So department staff are here to answer any questions you might have about some of these projects.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mercer. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Ms. Mercer. If my memory serves me correctly, some of these reports in the past had a status of canceled. But I'm not seeing that status on this report at all. Am I to assume that we're not using that anymore, or is it called something different now?
So through your worship to Councillor Bonner, so if a project was canceled, we would not be carrying forward that, and that depending on its project's funding source, it would either go back to reserves or contribute to surplus, or it could have been allocated to a different project. So this report it will not deal with the canceled projects. It only deals with the ones that we know we're still going to need funding for in the following year.
Okay, and this may be a harder question to ask. In our next part of the meeting, we're talking about surplus,
yes.
and a good chunk of that surplus is vacancies. And I'm wondering, have vacancies contributed to any of these items being delayed?
I will have to hand that over to the individual departments to answer.
Mr. Sims, good morning. Not seeing anyone else rushing up. That's a good thing.
Thank you, Worship. It's a good question. I would say, for the most part, speaking on behalf of Engineering Public Works, that the capacity, project management capacity is there, or we use external resources to help it. Some of the delays, though, are maybe more in the transportation side of things and the transportation planning, and some of the smaller projects like traffic calming, due to sort of constricted resources. Transportation is one example, and those do appear in the detailed numbers, but perhaps not in a large volume. So, answer is yes, but generally the larger projects go ahead quite well.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions from anyone. Ms. Mercer, thank you for the presentation. The next is yours as well, the 2021 Surplus Allocation. Always a happy news in one sense, and tick off some of the taxpayers who feel they've overpaid, but we can't please everyone.
Exactly. Thank you, Your Worship. So at the end of 2021, the city had a $5.6 million surplus from our 3 operating funds. So the general had a surplus of just under $4.2 million, sewer had a surplus of $472,000, and water fund had a surplus of just under $931,000. So the report does highlight some, as Councillor Bonner alluded to, some reasons for the larger drivers of the surplus. So as was mentioned, about just a little over $2 million was from wages and benefits. So we did have a variety of vacancies throughout the city during the year, and a savings resulted as a result of this. Keep in mind, this does include Parks, Rec, and Culture wages, as they were impacted by COVID restrictions. So there was still some trying to figure out how that worked with COVID. We had $895,000 in additional building permit revenue, so that was over and above what we had anticipated. We had $433,000 in unspent health and housing funds, so that contributed to surplus. Due to the pandemic, casinos were closed at the time we were producing the final budget for 2021, and as we didn't have an opening date for casinos, we didn't project any casino revenues at that point. So during 2021, we did receive $428,000 that went towards the general fund. So that contributed to the surplus. For aquatics revenues, we used a conservative revenue approach, and we, in 2021, due again to the ever-changing ups and downs as a result of the pandemic restrictions, and we received $417,000 more aquatic revenue than we had anticipated. We had $295,000 in tourism costs that came in less than expected, so that also contributed to surplus. The Nanaimo Prosperity Corporation had less than anticipated costs of about $212,000 in 2021. And as we knew, Viera revenues were going to be higher than we had expected, and that came in at just $199,000 more than we had anticipated. So that's for the Vancouver Island Emergency Response Academy that is run through Nanaimo Fire Rescue. We did have one deficit of a larger value, and that was $2.7 million, and it related to the RCMP contract. Now, this related to the retroactive wage settlement that happened in the summer between the unionized RCMP members and the federal government. So the city has been accruing a retro pay liability since 2017, which was the last year they had a contract. And this information that we accrued every year was provided by E-Division. So when the contract was finally settled, it resulted in a much higher than anticipated value. And so therefore resulting, based on the information we had, we have a $2.7 million deficit against that line item. So since this surplus report was drafted and submitted, we have received confirmation from E-Division that our accrual is within the range that we are going to get a bill for. So this deficit is accurate. Well, there was some thought that maybe, because we hadn't received a final number, that it could be more or less. So we were almost bang on within their range that they gave us. So that was positive from our record-keeping perspective. So our sewer fund, the bulk of that surplus came from higher than anticipated sewer revenue, user fees, and a little bit of unspent contingency. And the same goes for the water fund. The bulk of the surplus came from higher than anticipated water user fees and a bit of unspent contingency. So that summarizes the drivers of the surplus. The report also outlines staff's recommendations for allocating the surplus in each of these funds. So for the general fund, we're recommending that the surplus be allocated to 3 different areas. The first one being $500,000 going to the General Financial Stability Reserve. So as you may remember, this reserve has a minimum balance of $15 million, and it has a maximum balance that is calculated at 60 days of the prior year's budgeted operational expenditures. So currently that's $18 million. So that's the range that we'd like to keep that that reserve in. And so based on this, we are recommending allocating $500,000 to fund the post-employment benefit liability. Now this is the estimated liability for sick leave and retirement benefit payments. So we're required to record that liability in our financial statements, and we use this reserve to fund that. Our second recommended allocation is $1.6 million to the property acquisition reserve. So this will give council additional funds to purchase land in the future. So as you all may remember, in 2021, we had quite a few real estate purchases, and this has significantly drawn down the reserves for property acquisition. And so this will help replenish those reserves to fund future purchases. And lastly, we're recommending the remaining balance of $2,068,782 be put into the general capital reserve. So this is a general operating reserve, so there's more flexibility with this one, and its primary purpose is to fund capital projects. So this will provide council with a greater flexibility to fund unexpected or strategic projects that come up in the future. So with the price, and just as a caveat on this one too, with price increases we are currently seeing, this gives us a reserve fund to react to any of those potential project increases that may come up in the next while, because we don't anticipate some of the cost increases to go away within the next year or 18 months. So this gives us some money to help fund those unexpected events. For the sewer fund, we're recommending allocating the entire surplus of $472,068 to the sewer reserve, and that can fund a variety of operating and capital projects. And the same for the water reserve, we're allocating the entire, or the water fund, we're allocating the entire surplus of $930,884 to the water reserve. So staff is looking for council, or the committee's approval to allocate the surplus as outlined in the report.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mercer. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Ms. Mercer. Question with respect to, sorry, I'm on my iPad, so it's hard to jump back between the amounts, but I think it's about 1.6 for it's proposed for the general reserve. I was curious why that's chosen over, or why are staff recommending that over, say, the strategic infrastructure reserve or the special initiatives reserve? And then the other question I have is it good practice to be so the 500,000 for the liabilities that emerge that we tend to pay out at the general stability reserve fund. Is it good practice to sort of be using that? Should we be actually budgeting for that, or are we always relying on surplus to make up that difference?
Through your worship to Councillor Brown. So your first question is why use the general capital reserve instead of the, okay. Under normal circumstance, the special initiatives reserve, is that the, sorry, I'm getting so confused. You said this, the special initiatives reserve or the strategic?
Either or, I'm just wondering why the choice was made over those two.
Right. So with the special initiatives reserve, generally when we allocate money there, it's for a specific purpose. So as we don't have a specific project or item, we didn't use the special initiatives reserve. With regards to the strategic infrastructure reserve, that has a funding source of casino revenues and Fortis revenues. So that has a funding source already. This, we thought it does, but the general capital reserve, it has less, it's a general operating reserve, so there's less restrictions around it. We could use it for a variety of things. It provided flexibility, and there was a balance there already, so we thought we would add to that. It's still, council can still use it. It provides a lot of flexibility, and that's kind of the reasoning behind that. With your regards to your second question, I'm sorry, can you repeat that again, because I lost my train of thought.
Sure. My second question is, again, I'm losing track of all the terms and reserves here too. Right. Yes. But we put the 500,000 into the general financial stability reserve fund.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
But the logic there was to pay back that, or that we're going to have a liability that we will need to, we have to record and then ultimately pay. I'm just curious, should we actually be budgeting for that instead of relying on surplus every year to pay that?
Right. So historically, we always relied on surplus to fund this expenditure at the end of the year, or this outlay. And then a few years ago, we started, but we have budgeted for it with the funding to come from the General Financial Stability Reserve. In a sense, we're doing the same thing. We're budgeting it from, in a sense, surplus, because we like to keep a year or two ahead and have that funding in that reserve to fund this liability expense that we have each year. As it best practice, other municipalities do budget it from a reserve. So whether it's best practice, I'm not sure, but it is a funding source that is available for us to do that rather than taxation. And then at the end of the year, if we have the excess funds, we top up that, and so there's no impact to taxes. And that's a bit of our theory around that.
Yeah, Your Worship, I have two follow-up questions, both related. So the first, so the Special Initiatives Reserve, I was under the understanding that that was the most flexible. I just want to make sure that the reserve fund that is being proposed by staff is equally as flexible. And then the second question I have is, in the event that, say, we didn't have enough surplus to cover the liability, well, ultimately it is coming from taxation.
You faded right out, Councillor. Can't hear a word.
Hello? Hello?
The last...
You're back, but you cut out.
Yes.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay. My apologies. Okay, so my question, I just want to make sure that first reserve fund, I don't know where I cut out, the first reserve fund is equally as flexible as something like the Special Initiative Reserve. And the second question is, what do we do in the event, say, surplus doesn't cover the liability? Then we'd be drawing, I understand, we'd be drawing from the General Financial Stability Reserve and then developing a payback plan if it fell below the minimum threshold?
Yes, through Your Worship to Councillor Brown. So yes, the Special Initiatives Reserve is flexible. It is also an operating reserve. So operating reserves are, unlike statutory reserves, can be used. We have set aside, and we've said it's primarily for capital projects, but we could, there is no hard and fast rules around it like a statutory reserve. So we could use it for other things. We have used it for operating projects and things like that in the past. We'd like to use it for capital, but there is more flexibility around that. So I wouldn't see any difference between the two of them. With regards to your question regarding what happens if we don't have a surplus, yes, we would still fund it from the General Stability Reserve. And if it fell below that minimum balance, we would build in a repayment plan to get that reserve back up to its minimum balance in a future year. So we like to keep a little bit of a cushion in there so that we do have that flexibility. If we needed to draw on that reserve, we weren't necessarily drawing it down below its minimum value. But we have a mechanism in place to bring it back up if that happened.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did some research on our allocations over the last into the 5 years. Oh, by the way, 2018 is really hard to find on the website in case the website person's listening. And we typically put in at least $1 million into the water reserve each year, and sometimes way even more. And also the sewer, in the sewer, it's an average of $500,000 plus each year. I guess my first question is, how do we get a user rate paying more than we expected on sewer when we know exactly how many houses and industries we have, and we know that they all pay the same amount?
Right, so through Your Worship to Councillor Bonner. So growth is in there. So new subdivisions coming online, new houses, new buildings, and those kind of things. For sewer in particular, it's a flat fee per house, but we build in an amount for what we think growth is going to be, but often that ends up being, as you know, we've had quite a high growth in the last few years. So we can be out with that because we estimate what we think we're going to have new accounts come online, but the growth has been higher than that, than we have anticipated. So that contributes to sewer. For water, again, new accounts, that kind of thing, but also the weather. So last year was a really dry year, more water usage. In a wet year, we can see a deficit in water. So it depends. Water is harder to predict because it's based on usage, and there are other impacting factors to the weather being one. We try to take, try to look at an average over a few years and see how the revenue and our accounts and water usage is over that period, and then project on that. But it is at the end of the day a bit of a guessing game when we don't know what the weather's going to be like. So growth is a big factor. If we underestimate it, our revenues are going to be higher. And in some cases, we have, sometimes expenditures come in under budget, or if we have a main break, it could be over budget. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. It's still not quite for the sewer thing, in that we should also know what's coming online, because we have building permits and all that stuff's in a queue that's like a year and a half long. Who does the estimating and how much is going to come on? Like, wouldn't you get that from building department and telling these are the number of units that are going to come online next year?
I'm going to have Ms. Fulla come down and talk about where she gets her numbers from, because we do consult other departments on what that growth number is looking like.
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner. So when we're looking at the revenues for sewer, we are asking for departments what they're anticipating growth would be, but we don't actually ask how many number of units are coming online, because that's also hard for them to predict. I think the other thing to keep in mind too, when you're looking 5 years back, all the surplus isn't generated from just revenue. It could be expenditures, there could be vacancies in the sewer and water department. In sewer and water, we also budget an annual contingency. So we have a $60,000 contingency in sewer and a $100,000 contingency in water, because things like you have Bowen Road water main break, you can spend a lot of money very quickly. So some of those years, some of that surplus is created from expenditures being under budget, or we were lucky enough we didn't have to tap into the contingency. It's all not just generated from the revenue side.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. And I know we need the reserves in case something goes wrong, which has happened before and will happen again in the future. It just, to me, it's a philosophical idea of taxation. We're consistently over on sewer, which is a utility rate. Why not just say we're going to charge you less, but then we're also going to charge taxation this much and create a reserve of $500,000 a year and just build it up from there? To me, it's just it's how we say it. I mean, the money, we need the money in the reserve. I get all of that. It's just that it looks like people are paying a lot for sewer, but then we're saying at the end of the year, oh, by the way, it's way more than we thought you should have been paying, basically, right?
Yeah. Through the chair to Councillor Bonner. So a couple of things there. With the sewer rate increase, the actual only rate increase that residents and businesses pay for sewer is related to the asset management increase. So we have the increase related to asset management. We don't actually increase sewer fees for increases in operating costs. They've been absorbed through growth over the last few years. And the other thing to keep in mind is we're looking 10 years out, and we are in the midst of a sewer and water user rate review. And we're looking that we have enough funding for the next 10 years to fund those utilities, and they're self-sustaining. We're also seeing, as Ms. Mercer mentioned, huge cost increases on some of our projects with the way the economy is going right now. So that's going to impact our projects, and having those reserves and that long-term vision, make sure that we can keep proceeding with these projects and something doesn't come to a halt, because it is a self-funded utility. So I understand what you're saying when you look at 1 year, but we're always looking 10 years, and you'll see us come back later this year with the 20-year investment plan update, and we're looking 20 years out there, and we're seeing what gaps there are, and you're going to see when we come back, there is gaps in our utilities. In the sewer and water, we're anticipating that we're going to see the gaps not closing the way we would like in the general fund, because we're getting better information about our facilities. So we have a long-term vision for the city here, and we're trying to make sure the city's sustainable long-term. So looking at a year or two in isolation isn't looking necessarily at the bigger picture. Although I understand what you're saying, because taxpayers are looking at the bill that's coming to them today, but we're looking at the long-term vision.
Okay, and I have to say that the work that staff, you all done to make sure the city is safe in the future is much appreciated, and I think we're way far ahead of many other cities, so thank you for that. I do have a couple of other questions. If I'm looking at the 21-25 financial plan, and in 2021, it says the financial stability reserves is 20 million. And in 2022, it's roughly the same as 20 million. Are there more reserves in the financial stability reserve? Like it says reserves, because you mentioned 16 million for the financial stability reserve.
Yes, so we have, through your worship to Councillor Bonner, we have three. So we have one in the general fund, the sewer fund, and the water fund. So there is three, and each one of those has their own minimum and maximum balances.
And those are all part of the financial stability reserves?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, because you were saying 16 and I'm looking at 20 here, right?
Yeah.
So, one other question, if I may, Your Worship, and that has to do with the, I believe in your report, it is the unspent health and housing funds totaling, 433,000. Is it a possible, are we allowed to roll that over, carry that forward to the organization in the next year? I mean, legally, are we allowed to do that?
Through your worship to Councillor Bonner, yes, we can do that. Generally, unless it's under special circumstances, operating budgets are not carried forward. It's mainly just projects. So under normal circumstances, we haven't done that. Mr. Lindsay and I had talked about, yes, the money has gone into surplus, but or into reserves, but that money can be used to fund initiatives through the health and housing from that pot of money. So it's not directly put into and carry forward for that specific purpose, but the surplus can be used to fund any initiatives that do come from that health and housing portfolio.
Yeah, and I appreciate it, because my concern, and everybody answers their or reads their emails and thing, the number one issue that keeps popping up is homelessness issues in our town. Fully aware that we're not responsible for all of it, but we're certainly responsible for some of it. So I just thought it would be helping that organization when it does get on the ground that can go around running hard. So I'm happy with the idea that we can pull out if we needed it for whatever reason, so I'm fine with that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thanks. Given that we've got huge costs associated with homelessness, and it's a major strategic priority of this council, and that we've been waiting for the SPO to get up and rolling, and hopefully they can provide support, sort of allocating resources. I do think that the money, the surplus that was going to that organization should be earmarked for that organization or for initiatives around homelessness and such. And I mean, I understand the general financial stability or the general capital reserve is somewhat flexible, but I think that $300,000 would be more appropriate into the strategic infrastructure reserve, or to be earmarked directly for the SPO as seed money. I'm just curious on other councillors' opinion on that, and maybe we can entertain a motion.
Your Worship, if I may.
Mr. Rudolph.
I was going to comment generally, but on that question specifically, I think the work that group has been doing, the transition group and the SPL working group, continues, and it's my hope and expectation and understanding that the results of that work will be coming forward. Council will have to decide what form of agreement we'll have and the accountability, because it is public money and that type of thing. So how that fits into the spectrum of services that are provided in the city. So I think there will be ultimately a conversation around the funding and the length of it and the deliverables and the accountability back that has to be thought of in the future. So at that time, maybe it would be the time to pull the money back into or additional money or change the funding source. So I think it's a conversation that needs to happen. I don't think it's changed the intent. Council intends to support that organization, but there'll be a lot of details of what it's doing and how it fits into the overall spectrum of services that are being provided. There's also going to be an allocation that's going to have to be sought for future security in the downtown, because we have that security review going on. We're expecting a presentation within the next quarter to council on that, and that's an unfunded thing at this time. So there's a number of things that will be competing for some of these dollars. So I think it's a great question. We're all looking forward to the results of the review coming back to council, so that this will be another consideration, is what is the appropriate funding for that, and how will that be, what's the city's involvement in it. So,
and to follow up, so I guess, say organization gets up and running and we're like, hey, there needs to be $300,000 of resourcing for whatever particular emergent issue around that sphere comes up, and council of the day is like, okay, we need to think about where we can get that money from. Oh, hey, we can go to the general capital reserve, the general capital reserve and take that $300,000 up. Or is there a little bit more, I know you mentioned earlier that it's about the same, is there a little bit more requirements around that? Whereas if we were like, okay, we want to get that $300K out of the strategic initiatives reserve, there'd be no questions asked and we could just do it like that. That's kind of my question in terms of the flexibility.
We could allocate the $433,000 to the Special Initiatives Reserve and mark it as health and housing funding, and that would be, we would not touch it for anything else. Specifically for that, we could take some of that and allocate it out, and it is up to council's purview to do that.
I'd like to move to do that right now. That the $433,000 that was going to the SPO be allocated to the Strategic Initiatives Reserve.
Special Infrastructure Reserve.
Special Infrastructure Reserve. And you're now earmarked for health and housing.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Bonner? Councillor Gusebrock, do you want to say anything further?
No, I think the intention's clear.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure if I can support this one. I'm kind of curious about process here and what we're trying to do. So we are in the process of working with the community to set up the systems planning organization. This council has provided about $500,000 in funding over the next 5 years to that organization to do that work. We are in the process of defining what the deliverables would be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I worry a little bit that if we park this in health and housing, is that then going to be next year's funding for it and we're reducing our funding? Is that going to be a pool that people can draw from in projects that the SPO is working on? I think I would like a little bit more understanding about, I completely agree with you. We need to resource this in a way that we haven't before. However, I'm comfortable with parking it, but I'm just not sure how we're going to go from parking it to actually operationalizing what the SPO is trying to do. So looking forward to hearing from Councillor Bonner on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hemmons. I'm a bit concerned about whether we're a bit sharing this, Ms. Mercer.
So the one thing I would suggest keeping in mind, if you had a one-time expenditure related to the health and housing and you funded it from the reserve, that has no tax impact. But if you determine that you need double the funding, say in 2023, and you have half of it funded from taxation in the budget, and then you use the other half to fund it from reserves, 2023 is fine, but in 2024, you're going to have a bigger hit to a tax increase because you're using a reserve to fund an ongoing operating cost. So just as a warning that there are some tax implications of using reserves to fund ongoing operations. Just something to think about.
Councillor Bonner and then Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. I'm of two minds of this also. I was willing to accept the idea that we're putting it into this general reserve. But then I thought about it a bit more after some of the councillors spoke, and I thought I'd rather send the message that this is important, right? If we put it into a general reserve that can be used for everything, including, chopping trees down and making toys out of them, then we're not sending the message here. I fully recognize that having this money spent on operations will cause us problems down the year, and I'm not necessarily sure that's what we want to do. But we're not even sure exactly all the things that the SBO is going to do. So all this is saying here is let's put this money into this reserve, as Councillor Gesselbrock has suggested, and we're sending the message out that it's available there, and when the time comes and we get requests from the SBO or from the agencies through the SBO, which is generally where this is going to go, that we can decide at that time, is this operations or is this programming or is this one-time funding, that sort of thing. But I think we're sending the message here, this is important to not only the SBO and its success, but also the citizen Nanaimo that we're obviously taking this seriously. So those are the two reasons I think I'm going to support this going forward. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Councillor Brown, who hasn't spoken yet, and then back to Councillor Gesselbrock.
So with respect to the sentiment, I would support the entirety of our surplus going to health and housing initiatives in some fashion. But I think my understanding from Ms. Mercer answering questions earlier is that the general, oh man, so many generals, so many reserves, I'm losing track. Glad to see I'm not the only one though. But with the ultimate flexibility, I understand that the General Capital Reserve Fund it doesn't preclude us taking any money to fund these types of projects, even though they wouldn't to be true capital projects. We could make that decision later. I also think is that we have a 5-year commitment annual. It's already in our 5-year financial plan for operations with respect to the SPO. I do think it would be unreasonable for us not to provide some sort of seed money of sorts, different programmings and things like that as they emerge, and have that. I think we need to make sure that we have that money available in some fashion. But we also do have a good chunk of money sitting in the Housing Reserve Fund. So I'm 100% supportive of the sentiment and do think this is an area that we need to fund, resource more. I'm fully aware that we can't fund it as it should be funded by the province or feds. But I'm just wondering if there's if we're making sure that this money is flexible and there's a future conversation point coming up, that would just be best to delay and then make that decision when we have a better understanding of what kind of programming might be available through the SPCO or SPO or through some sort of intention. But also, so I think in my mind, the most crucial thing today is whether it's this item or whether it's a different item, that we're making sure that the surplus has maximum flexibility attached to it to pivot and fund programs for the city, whether they are infrastructure projects or whether they are things to health and housing. So I'm very hesitant to support the allocation of that, because I just don't think that we need to at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gesselbrock, then Councillor Thorpe, then Councillor Hemmons.
Thanks. Yeah, just a little bit, clarify my understanding. Basically, we have allocated a yearly amount towards the SPCO. We didn't get the SPO up and running, and so that $433,000, I think, didn't get used. So now, we're putting it back somewhere unallocated, just back into a general reserve, and effectively, who knows what's going to happen in the future, but we've kind of lost $433,000. Not lost, but that $433,000 that we were initially going to spend in this direction is now diluted into, whatever else a future council would like to spend it on. So I think that I would like to, have a little bit more security in knowing that this money, these resources that we're going to go towards moving forward this type of agenda is going to be put somewhere where once the folks get organized in terms of where those resources need to be allocated, we'll have access to them again and be able to deploy things that we've already protected for that reason. Because agendas can change down the line, and I don't want to see this money be utilized for something else that is, of utmost importance. And so maybe it's being overly protected over it. However, I just want it to go into the reserve that's going to allow the utmost flexibility, but be earmarked for that realm, that sphere of focus, whether it's the SPO that's doing it, or whether it is the planning department that's looking at where those funds can be allocated to support the homelessness and addictions and that whole sphere of issues. And so that's the intention of this. And my understanding, and I think that it is somewhat confused now of the different reserves in this, but the strategic infrastructure reserve allows for the most flexibility so that as this SPO gets up and going, they can come to council and we can sort out where it's appropriate to allocate it, where it might be a little bit difficult from the general infrastructure reserve.
Your Worship, if I may just clarify, and I just sought the clarification from Ms. Mercer, which I think she should repeat, that the direction from council and the commitment from council was to seed fund this organization for 5 years, regardless of when it starts. So it's taken a little longer for the stakeholders to get their head around how this is going to work, and this is good investment of time. By the time the people that are going to run and operate this have invested time to make sure that it's going to be effective, then the clock will start ticking. And I'm not sure how that translates into, it's not money lost, it's just money that hasn't started to be expended. So that's the way I kind of see it. So there's the 5-year commitment, unless council changes that. This is just money that was unspent and unallocated last year, and it's being put back like the other unspent monies into general. And the other thing about this is, as I mentioned, when this does come back to council for review, there's a significant fiscal conversation I think that council should have with respect to all the monies that are coming into the city to address this, as much as we can earmark that, be it provincial or federal, which goes through the United Way and that type of thing. And how does this money investment fit into things? And what in addition to that would be council's or the city's involvement, because we sometimes get asked that question, notwithstanding this, what is the city doing? And there's still a social planning function here, and there will be some time, staff commitment, and projects I suspect will still be required. So there will be more time to have a conversation around the fiscal side of this entire issue, as that presumably that report comes back to council hopefully in the near future. And as far as, I just wanted to reiterate that it's our understanding that this is a 5-year commitment moving forward once it starts moving forward. I may be slightly inaccurate on that, but I'd ask Ms. Mercer to verify how that works fiscally. And then over and above that would be this question, essentially you'd be adding money to that account by doing this, I think, not replacing money that's already earmarked.
Councillor Thorpe, Councillor Hemmons, then Councillor Martman, and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. Interesting discussion, and I appreciate the intent of the motion. I'm not going to support it, though, and I think Mr. Rudolph has made some excellent points along with Ms. Mercer. To me, it's simply not necessary. We are already committed to seeding the SPO, and we're assured that the money as staff is suggesting, will be in a reserve that has maximum flexibility. So if we wish to have a discussion in future to use money for that particular purpose, fair enough, that's fine, we can have that discussion. But has also been pointed out, the SPO is not yet up and running, although we are funding it. And its actions and its accountability have yet to be determined. And I'm not comfortable simply putting more money in that one pocket until we need it and can have a fuller discussion. I'm also cognizant of the point that Ms. Mercer made, that I think we need to reiterate that approving this motion will have a tax impact in a couple of years' time, and I think that's something we definitely need to consider when this is not an emergent need for us to make. So I'm happy with leaving things as they are, taking the staff advice, and I might add, Your Worship, it's expertise advice that comes from a staff that I believe has just won a national award for responsible financial management. So I'm happy with the recommendation as it stands, and I will not support the amendment. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm also not going to support the motion, although I deeply appreciate the intent. I think the work of the Health and Housing Task Force really identified that while we need resources, of course, it's not an influx of money necessarily that we need, we need to better coordinate. And there's steps around how we do that. The very first step is setting up the organization that's going to do that. I worry a little bit about, on the side now, having this pot of money that can be accessed and maybe not led through those principles of collaboration. I very much agree that we need to resource this differently. I don't think this is the right way to do it. I think the SPO is going to provide us direction about how to do it. I'm hearing that it's still protected in our reserve, that we can pull it out. I'm also curious, just looking at the report, the precedent. If we do this, we could be setting a precedent for 212 to go back to tourism and 212 to go to the Prosperity Agency, which again, I'm not necessarily against, but goes against what we initially intended to do. So deeply appreciate the intent, and I will fight to get that organization the funding they need, but I don't think this is the appropriate way to do it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Martman, then Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I too appreciate the intent of the motion. I think it was about protecting that we want to move forward with the SPO. However, and this may be a question for staff, is that protecting it for the future, any council could change any of it. The future council could change any of it. So it wouldn't necessarily be protected. Am I correct?
Ms. Mercer?
Through your worship to Councillor Martman, that is correct. A future council could make a different decision depending on what commitments were made in writing. It is their choice to make a different decision.
Right. So with that in mind, and some of the other comments of Councillor Thorpe, etc., yeah, I will not be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. So building off where Councillor Martman left off, is you can't have a reserve fund with ultimate flexibility, and then even if you do earmark it, not preserve that flexibility. So someone can spend it differently if they choose to, which I think there's a tension there, and what this is trying to achieve is how do we preserve the flexibility, but then also how do we funnel it to an organization that doesn't yet exist. But I just wanted to say a few things around clarity. The 5-year commitment to the Health and Housing Task Force isn't something that has been earmarked. At one point it had been, but now it is set in budget and the plans for 5 years, tax for it. So I think that's important. I do think I think it said we needed, the Health and Housing Report said we needed $20 million in financial investment in 2021 alone. So I do think there's a role here moving forward that I don't think we can turn our back to around capital funding or program funding or above and beyond operating funding be a better way to say it. So I'm not going to support this motion as it's on the floor. But I do think we have to be really cognizant of what was actually in that report, and with respect to the funding requirements that undoubtedly require different funding sources, but I don't think it's something we can turn our back to either. So that's why I 100% appreciate the sentiment of Councillor Kesselborg's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I don't know that the phrase quite applies here, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but I think there are many other ways that we can signal our concern around the issue relating to mental health, addictions, trauma, brain injury, and our homelessness crisis. And this is not only not necessary, to me, it is somewhat akin to advising grandparents when they're drawing their will to let their grandchildren know there's a fund set aside for them they can spend later, and I assure you they'll figure out how to spend it, whether it's for a good intention or not. And I don't mean that too critically, but there's no sense committing these funds now specifically. I think Council will do the right thing when the time comes, when the SPO is up and running and operating appropriately, and I trust Council to do it. Councillor Bonner, the last word, and I hope short.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just quickly, I'm going to support the motion only because I think it's important that we make a statement here. I view taxation as sort of like a contract, right? So we've taxed the citizens of Nanaimo. We said we're going to spend it on this, this, and this, including tourism, including the Economic Prosperity Organization. And if we then don't spend it on that, then what are we saying to taxpayers, right? So to me, us earmarking that says, yes, we taxed you for this and it will get spent, and it'll get spent eventually, but that's why I'm kind of thinking this. That's why I don't like big surpluses, because it's a whole bunch of taxation and it's not getting spent on what we said we were going to do. So that's my point, and that's why I'll support it, and I will recommend, probably it's not going to pass. But
Councillor Gesselbrock, some new point, I
Thanks.
trust.
No, I appreciate the discussion on this. I think it was important to just sort of flesh out some rationale on this, and you know, I get the feedback and the direction things are going. You know, since Don said he was going to support it, you know, I'm in as well, and I think you know, for what it's worth. But I appreciate the discussion on it, and I think things will move in the right direction. So let's call the question.
Thank you. And Councillor Gesselbrock's motion, all those in favor? Councillor Gesselbrock and Councillor Bonner and Councillor Brown, demonstrating some solidarity, I suppose. And those opposed, Councillors Hemmons, Krog, Thorpe, Turley, and Martman. Thank you very much. The motion is defeated. Would someone care to make the recommended motion before we take the morning break? Moved Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion on the recommended motion? If not, all those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Thank you. 10 minutes, everyone. I'm going to have to cut out early today if we go too late, and Councillor Bonner may have a grandchild, happily, so to speak, I think I heard him say. So it's an exciting day that we might wish to skip early. So 10 minutes, everyone. Thank you very much. That's right. Hi, Leonard Krog here. I'm here with Karen Lindsay today. She's going to show me how to sign up for our app.
Voyant Alert, the City of Nanaimo's emergency notification system. So we'll start by going into the App Store, Mayor Krog.
Done.
Next, you're going to hit search. and you're going to search for the app, which is Voyant Alert. So it's VOYENT. Now you see it's already selected it. Click there, hit get, and then we're going to install.
And why are we downloading this app?
We're downloading that so that you can get this onto your phone system, and what it will do is it will send you a push notification out. So if the City of Nanaimo issues an emergency alert, it will actually push the notification out onto your phone. The really nice part of this app is that it's anonymous, so it goes by postal code. So we're not requesting you to put your name or personal information in, it just works off of the app through your phone system. There are also, if you have family members or friends that maybe don't have a smartphone or would like another way, you can also sign up online or call our Public Works Department, and they have phone and texting options available as well. So there's lots of options for people depending on what their needs are.
Fabulous. So you can rest with some comfort knowing you can find out what's necessary and know that people who are important to you are notified.
Absolutely. So now you have Voyant Alert on your phone. And now just select open. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to tap in the postal code that it's prompting you.
All right. So
you just click on there and start entering. And then find on a map. So here you'll see the welcome page for the City of Nanaimo, and you want to subscribe to notifications, yes?
Yes.
Click that you agree to the terms, so click both to the yes for consent, and then hit next. And it's going to ask to either allow or not allow notifications, and you want to always allow.
Always allow.
Always allow. And the reason that is, if you don't allow, it won't push the notification out to you. So always allow.
Always allow.
And now you see here, you've got a message to accept that you've signed out. That's the two-factor authentication, and you're going to tap yes. And now you're in the system. Also, when you have a moment, we recommend that you pick your locations and sign up based on those locations, and then you'll get alerts from the City of Nanaimo.
Karen, thank you. Everyone, sign up.
Hey, Tiana. Hey. This sure is the coldest rink in town.
Whoa! Yeah, buddy! Nice save, James!
Wow, your goalie is keeping you guys in the game. Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, man, that's hot.
Sorry, that's the way I like it. Oh. Go, 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 go! Penalty shot! Scalds from hot drinks are a leading cause of hospitalization for children under 5.
2 minutes, stand in the front, unsportsmanlike conduct.
Hot tea and coffee will cause serious burns to a child in less than a second.
Got it, kid? Use the lid.
This is the 2018 redux of the lighting at Nanaimo's historic bastion. I've had the pleasure of being part of the relighting project on this amazing building in downtown Nanaimo. So what we did is we've replaced the original high pressure sodium lights, which basically did an okay job of lighting up the bottom 10 feet of the building, and replaced them with modern LED lighting that has the capacity to change color. We can run through a number of different colors that we have pre-programmed here, in a pink, a purple, a green. Probably my favorite on here is Rainbow Chase for Pride Week. It'll actually run all the way around the building all the time.
With this new technology, organizations can now request that the bastion be lit to promote their cause by going to the City of Nanaimo website and following the instructions. Go to Your Government, Bastion Lighting Requests, complete the lighting request form, and submit. You will hear from us within a couple days if your request has been approved, and the bastion will be lit in the colors that you have requested. If you have any questions, please contact the Mayor's office at 250-755-4400.
So the next time you're in downtown Nanaimo at night, come on and check out the new dynamic lighting at the Bastion.
This is a plug catch basin. We have 10,000 plus of these in the city of Nanaimo with over 600 kilometers of road. Maintenance staff can't be everywhere at once. So we don't ask a lot for the city of Nanaimo residents, but if they know that they have one of these catch basins, clear it off with a shovel or a rake. Do not use your hands. If this gets plugged, you could ultimately flood a neighbor around the corner, flood a road, which is prone to hydroplaning. And if you're lucky enough that you have a green bin, by all means, throw the compost into the green bin. And if you don't, throw it into a composting pile. It's just gonna make a lot of the roads much more clear once we have the debris lifted off. During a snow event, the catch basin can be plugged with snow. The resident knows the proximity of the catch basin, by all means, grab a shovel or a rake, don't use your hands, and clear it off again. This is ultimately gonna save you from flooding, the road, or your neighbor. You know, as much as we want help cleaning the plug catch basins off, please do not assist us by trying to unplug a culvert. Call the city yard. They have 24/7 service. It's 250-758-5222. And also there is sandbags and sand available. Just bring a shovel.
We're here at
at Bruce and Dundas. Somebody's stolen the street names that were here, so we're here to replace them. Our sign shop has just generated us 2 signs, so I'm going to go through the process of putting it together and reinstalling the street names. First thing, we got to center the signs. We do everything on this truck. We've got all the equipment on here to build, install, remove, repair, whether it's street signs, street names, posts, banners, Christmas decorations, and so forth. I'm going to basically just put the sign in the brackets, and we'll be doing both signs, of course. So I've got a cross bracket that I'm going to put in, and then add the top sign, which is
There we are. That's better. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. The next item on the agenda are the 2022 property tax due dates. Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Let me find my handy notes. So, as you know, the city must adopt a tax bylaw by May 15th of each year per the community charter. And under the municipal tax regulation, the city must charge a 10% penalty on any outstanding current taxes. So legislation defaults to a municipal tax collection scheme where property taxes are due on the first working day after July 1st of each year, and a 10% penalty is levied after that on anything outstanding. So in 2020, as a relief measure in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Council chose to keep the tax due date at July 2nd, and so keep it as a soft due date, and then extend the tax penalty due dates for all property classes to October 1st at 5%, and then the second 5% on November 12th. Similarly, in 2021, Council chose to keep the tax due date at July 2nd, and but chose to change the first property tax penalty due to 1% on July 2nd, and extend the second property tax penalty due to 9% on September 10th. So for 2022, as the pandemic and inflation continue to impact our community, staff are recommending the following. So keep the tax due date at July 4th, which is the first working day after July 1st, and change the first property tax penalty due to 2% on July 4th, and extend the second property tax penalty due to 8% on August 31st. So we've been in contact with other local island communities, and this is pretty consistent with what all of the other ones are doing, as having a 2 and 8% split. The difference between the communities was the second due date, but we're all kind of within a week of each other, so they would be bringing forward that to their councils as well. So the final financial impact to the city, and based on the last 2 years, we don't anticipate any cash flow issues. We haven't run into that in the previous 2 years. It's unlikely that we will this year. If more properties pay before the due date, council could see, or the city could see a revenue shortfall in tax penalties. So for 2022, we have $525,000 budgeted for tax penalty revenues, and 2021 actuals were just about $437,000. So we could see a discrepancy between what we've budgeted and actuals, but it's not a large amount of money. And all the other government payovers would be paid as usual. In the first year, we got some leniency on paying over the date. They extended the dates to pay over other governments, but since 2020, they've kept to their standard. So there's no tax or cash flow implications there. So this is what is being recommended. So I'll turn it back over to council for any discussion or questions you may have about this.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mercer. I am not seeing anyone question the staff recommendation on due dates. Moved Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is the BC Sustainable Energy Association Coolant program for Nanaimo schools. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship.
Filling out. Ho, ho, ho.
Thank you. We're here this morning seeking the committee's support in allocating $10,000 from your Climate Action Reserve to support volunteers from the BC Sustainable Energy Association to go in and provide in-class workshops to grade 4 and 5 and high school students in the district. This is a program, as outlined in the report, that's provided in many communities and school districts throughout the province, and it was an opportunity that was identified by Ms. Pan, who's our as manager of sustainability. We have had discussions with the local school board, and they are supportive of this program, and we're certainly happy to take any questions. Ms. Pan is joining us virtually here and also available if there's any questions from council.
Thank you very much. A good program, Mr. Lindsay. I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. Moved Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? Seeing none. Ms. Pan, you're off the hook this morning. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Consideration of permissive tax exemption. Back to Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we have one organization requesting to be put on the permissive tax exemption bylaw for 2023. So this applicant has met the current or the criteria outlined in the grants policy and guidelines. So the applicant was the Loaves and Fishes Community Food Bank Society, and their application is related to the property that they occupy at 1861 East Wellington Road. And the approximate value of the PTE would be $19,000. Give or take, where we don't have the final information for 2022 yet, so that's our estimation. And so we're here seeking council or the committee's recommendation on how to proceed with this application.
Moved Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Hemmons. Not Councillor Martman.
No, I was just going to move the recommendation, so it's all good.
Councillor Thorpe beat you to it this morning. I'll let you have the motion to adjourn when it comes. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. The next is the Infrastructure Canada Active Transportation Fund. Ms. Mercer.
Thank you. So this grant program is aimed at increasing the total amount, usage, and quality of active transportation infrastructure throughout Canada. So eligible projects should support capital and planning projects that encourage a modal shift away from cars and improve the safety and security of Canadians. So the project must be completed by March 31st of 2026. And this program does have stacking rules that apply, and they have a maximum of federal funding for a total of 60% of the overall project. So staff have shortlisted 4 projects for consideration. They are the Beban Trails Phase 1, the 3rd Street Wakefield to Pine Cycle Lane and Sidewalk, the 5th Street Wakasaya Bruce Cycling Lane and Sidewalk, and finally the Terminal Phase 2 Commercial to Wentworth Sidewalk Project. So after reviewing all of these projects, staff are recommending submitting applications for the Beban Trail Phase 1 project, and if successful, the grant would be about $495,000. And the second application would be for the 3rd Street Wakefield to Pine project, and the possible grant, if awarded, would be about $450,000. And it was felt that these 2 projects were the best fit for this grant stream. And the grant application deadline is March 31st, so the end of this month. And a funding announcement is not expected till mid-2023. So there is a long waiting period on finding out whether we're successful with these or not. So, and staff are here to answer any questions you have about this grant stream or the projects that have been put forward.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mercer. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Ms. Mercer. So under the financial implications, it indicates that the city on Phase 1 Bevan Trail, it indicates that the city will be required to fund $330,000 if the application is successful. Is that funding coming from a reserve or from increased taxes?
Through your worship to Councillor Turley. I'm just sorry, Ms. Fulla can answer that because she was heavily involved with this and I'm reaching for an answer.
That's okay.
Ms. Fulla, welcome again.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Turnley. So we already have approximately $110,000 in the approved budget for the trail, and the difference between the $330,000 and the 110 would be committed from your strategic infrastructure reserve. So this is a similar situation as with the Harewood artificial turf fields. You committed money from your strategic infrastructure reserve so that we could proceed with the grant application, and that was contingent on us getting being successful with the grant application. And if we were, then we'd take the money from your SIR, and if we weren't, then that money would be freed up again for other projects.
And I assume the same is true with 3rd Street and 5th Street.
So through your worship to Councillor Turley, 3rd Street is fully funded in the plan, and so this would reduce the city's funding requirement, and those funds could be used to fund other projects. The 5th Street, I believe, is the same, and it is the same. So it is fully budgeted within the plan, so any grant funding that we would receive would reduce the city's required component.
Thank you.
And Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Through you, I'm just wondering, the recommendations is only for 2, for 3rd Street and for Bevan. And why didn't we think of 5th Street, which has more, if we were given the grant, has more bang?
Through your worship to Councillor Martman, is my understanding that staff capacity was taken into consideration, and it was felt that these 2 projects could be done and within that the time frame without putting additional constraints on time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any further questions. Someone wish to, I don't think we've moved the motion yet. Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Pardon me, Councillor Bonner, sorry.
Thank you. I thought we were going to have questions at the next part, but the one small question I had, if I may, is the part on Bevan, I know where we're putting the water line, and this is go over top of that. Are we then jumping over from there to what is a trail there now, all the way to to the ENN? And reason I'm asking this is we just put in some nice bike lanes on Bowen, and I wonder if we're starting to duplicate stuff here, or one will get used less.
Thanks, Your Worship.
Mr. Sims.
It's part of the network of trails are proposed around the exterior of Bevan, but it's also a network connection between ENN Trail down the side of the Ministry building to Bevan. But that'll eventually loop through down to the Parkway Trail and the off Bowen Bikeway, so-called along Boxwood Road.
Mm-hmm. So is there a way to get to it from Bowen Road on the bike lanes? I guess we'd have to go down.
You have to go down Labia.
Okay, right, thanks.
All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is the Tire Stewardship BC Community Grant Program. Again, Ms. Mercer.
Thank you. So this report is to advise the committee that the city has applied for the Tire Stewardship BC Community Grant Program in the amount of $30,000 for the Maffeo Sutton Park Playground Phase 2 project. So this program provides matching funding up to 50% of eligible costs to a maximum of $30,000. And funding can be used towards the purchase, freight, and installation of recycled tire products. So this funding would help cover the costs of purchasing and installing the poured-in-place rubber surfacing at Maffeo Sutton Park Playground. And it is estimated that the total cost of this portion of the overall project would be about $110,000. And just as a note, staff have also applied for grant funding for this project through the Canada Community Revitalization Fund, as well as CAL's Replay Fund, which we're going to talk about in the next report. So a funding announcement for this grant stream is expected mid-May 2020.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Councillor Gesselbrock?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question. The tire surfaces are rad for kids to play on. They're great. The concept of recycling used tires is great. It fits into sort of that whole circular economy idea and trying to keep waste out of landfill. I've had a few people reach out concerned about potential negative health impacts from the ground tire and as it wears, like inhalation of it, in contact, potential aspects in there. I did try to do a little bit of research on it, but as you go into the internet, people say all sorts of crazy things. And so I'm just curious, from the reports I read, that there hasn't been a whole lot of research on the impacts, and children are more vulnerable, and I am mildly concerned that we are excitedly, for the right reasons, going down a certain track, but might be overlooking some unfortunate consequences of this, where other services might not pose the same threat. So I'm just asking staff if has there been any research done on that or looked into this aspect, and two, that maybe at a future thing put forward that we do a little bit of background on this to make sure that we're not inadvertently providing services that are dangerous. Thank you.
Yeah, so through your worship to Councillor Gesselbrock, great question. It's a similar theme that was kind of brought up when we transitioned from our standard pea gravel safety surfaces to the wood fiber that was there, because wood fiber, it's a product that comes from a multitude of products, and it's recycled, and it's used for safety surfacing. The only thing I can say definitively right now is that the safety surfaces that we use, like the fiber and then the recycled rubber, it's CSA approved product that you see used, and it goes through the Canadian Playground Safety Institute, and those are how those recommendations are made. But in regard to that research directly, I'm not aware of any, but what I will do is reach out to our park staff that are directly responsible for that and see if we can pull up any additional information around that.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. I'm Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Councillor Gesselbrock and Art for the comment and the response, because it's something that I've been trying to do research on too, and it's extremely limited in terms of what's out there. And as Councillor Gesselbrock alluded to, there's a lot of opinion, and then there's clearly a lot of not thorough research, or not to the extent that you can draw conclusions. So happy to support this, but it is sort of a lingering question in my mind. Same with actually the artificial turf fields. I get the environmental benefits, but again, there's conflicting research about health impacts, from everything from injury to, when you do a skid, and the impact on the chemicals and things like that. So going to support, but I am always weary of, if you look at the boards of CSA and stuff like that, it's all kit manufacturers that are, kind of find it very similar to like the waste reduction boards in extended producers and things like that, where it's comprised of a lot of industry. And I think that's beneficial on one hand, but also problematic on the other when they have invested interests. So happy to support, but I do think there's some lingering questions here that hopefully some more thorough research will be produced in the coming years.
Thank you very much. If there's no further discussion, appreciate the report. The next is CAL's Replay Fund. Ms. Mercer again.
Thank you. So again, this report is to advise the committee that the council has applied for CAL's Replay Fund grant in the amount of $20,000 for the same Maffeo Sutton Park Playground Phase 2 project. So similar to the Tire Stewardship Grant, funding can be used towards the purchase, freight, and installation of recycled rubber products made from scrap tires generated in Canada. So however, there is no max funding with this grant stream, as opposed to the last one. This funding would help cover the costs of purchasing and installing the poured-in-place rubber surface. So like I said in the last report, staff have also applied for grant funding for this project through 2 other grant streams. So the funding announcement for this grant stream is expected by the end of April of this year. So it wouldn't take too long for us to hear on that.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any questions on that. Other business? In light of the spirited discussion this morning around figs and Councillor Martman's acknowledgement that she picks them, I was tempted to bring forward a notice of motion, having her designated council's official fig plucker, but I've decided against that. And would ask her to make the appropriate move for adjournment now. Thank you.
So moved. We have a
Councillor
question
Bonner?
period. No questions?
No questions.
You move for adjournment.
Seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much.